Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online program titled Sand Rush, the Revival of the Beach in 20th Century Los Angeles. And thank you for joining us for this Book Club of California presentation. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. Now, for those of you who are new to the Book Club of California, the Book Club is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and the history of California and the West. The Book Club also publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, history of California and the West, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest and the benefits are many. We simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or to donate. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled Sand Rush, the Revival of the Beach in 20th Century Los Angeles. And our presenter is Elsa Devienne. Now, Elsa Devienne is Assistant Professor in U.S. History at Northumbria University. Previously, she taught at Princeton University, the Université Paris-Nanterre, Sciences Po Paris, and the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. I probably was terrible in that French, but I didn't take French in high school or college. Her research lies at the intersection of urban history, environmental history, and the history of gender, body, and sexuality, with a focus on the 20th century. She has a particular interest in the history of Americans' intense engagement with their coastlines, from the 19th century beach bathing boom until today's climate crisis and its catastrophic consequences for coastal communities. She's the author of several articles published in academic journals in the US and in Europe, including the Journal of Urban History, the European Journal of American Studies, and California History, among many others. She regularly appears on radio, podcasts, and TV shows to speak about her research. The subject of her presentation this evening is her first book, Sand Rush, the Revival of the Beach in 20th Century Los Angeles, which won the 2021 Willie Paul Adams Award from the Organization of American Historians for the best book on American history published in a language other than English. Sand Rush traces the history of Los Angeles's coastline over the 20th century, revealing how the city's man-made shores served as a central locus for the reinvention of seaside leisure and the triumph of modern bodies. Her book not only uncovers how Los Angeles's coastline was constructed, but also how this major planning engineering project affected the lives of ordinary city dwellers and attracted many Americans to move to Southern California. Now, in terms of the logistics for tonight's webinar, we'll have a presentation. The program will include a presentation with the shared screen, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Now, if you have questions or comments for our presenter or about the presentation itself, you can put those in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll come back at the top of the hour to source some questions from the chat and the Q&A to guide our discussion. So now, I'm done talking. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Elsa Devienne. Elsa, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you so much for this introduction. I want to start by thanking the Book Club of California for having me today, and thanking you, Kevin Kozik, for getting this organized and set up and everything. And thanking you all for joining this webinar today. It's really a pleasure to be able to share this book, which was indeed first published in French, and to share it with the people to whom it matters the most, that is for people in California. So what I'm presenting today is indeed a piece of work that has undergone multiple mutations and phases, because it started as actually a French PhD dissertation that I defended indeed in Paris at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. And then it became a French book that you see here on the left, which was published in March 2020. Which was actually the week the lockdown was announced in France, which was great timing. I couldn't even get my hand on the book because the book was locked up in the offices of the Sorbonne Edition, which is the publisher in France. And then finally reaching what will be hopefully, what is its final stage really, as a publication in English with Oxford University Press. So as the project evolved, so did the title. So in French, the title was also the Sandrush, but as it became an English book, we dropped the because we thought that Sandrush was more hard-hitting than the Sandrush. And then the subtitle changed also a little bit. In French, it was an environmental history of the beaches in LA in the 20th century. And then, but I actually thought it was not really reflective of the breadth of the book. So in conversation with the editor at Oxford, we decided that the revival of the beach in 20th century LA was a much better title that reflected really what the book was trying to do. And it's not just the title that changed, it's the historiography, the scholarship change. I changed because I moved from France to the US first for my postdoc, and then to the UK for my job, which I'm currently at Northumbria in Newcastle. And so did the situation with regards to climate change and with regards to sea level rise. That is, when I finished the dissertation, things hadn't yet taken the urgent, this urgency that we have now in coastal areas wasn't yet felt as much back then. And so the book evolved also with those developments. So this is how I will organize my presentations today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I came to this topic. You must be already wondering why a French person ended up writing about the beaches of LA. So I'll tell you a bit about that. And then why the Sandrush, why that title, and I'll give you a bit of a sense of the general narrative for the book. And then the third moment is something new I'm trying, which is just sharing with you my favorite archival finds. So a bit of in a random order. And finally, we'll talk a bit about the beaches as we're looking toward the present and the future. So let me take you to the beaches of Los Angeles, of Santa Monica, actually, to be specific. The beaches as I discovered them in 2008, when I first arrived here as a visiting student at UCLA. And I was dog sitting and cat sitting. I was living on, I think it was California and 3rd, so I was very lucky, right by the beach. And I arrived at the ocean front, seeing the Pacific for the first time, and I was really shocked and fascinated by this landscape. Why? Because as a French person, first of all, I was really not used to seeing such a developed beach. In France, especially on the Atlantic coastline, the beaches have been relatively preserved from overdevelopment. And yeah, in general, you don't see much built on the sand itself. So here I was completely fascinated by the fact that people had built parking lots and freeways and housing and flats, etc., on the beaches. So I thought, and those were the first questions really that came to me, how come people had thought at one point in time that this was a good idea to build parking lots, freeways on the beach? And why did people think that this was a good use of the sand to have those construction? Who could ever think that it was a good idea? And even more importantly, how come have people seemingly forgotten about it in LA because I couldn't find any answers about this. And so as the topic, as I started researching the topic, here we see very well how developed the beach is, right? From that aerial perspective. So that was really my shocking discovery, right? And as I started researching the topic, I ended up discovering the photographs of that same Santa Monica beach at the Santa Monica Public Library. And it was clear from looking at those two photographs, this one on the left from the 1890s and this one on the right. By the way, you can tell it was 2008 because the image is not very good quality. I had one of those old digital camera that now seem very old-fashioned. But anyway, so comparing those two photographs, it was clear to me that something enormous had happened. On the left, those beaches were quite narrow compared to those enormous and vast sandy beaches that Angelenos can enjoy today. And so this discovery prompted the initial questions that guided my research. What happened between these two photographs? When and how did this radical transformation of the coastal landscape had happened, and why had people forgotten about it? So these questions eventually led me to the city archive, and in particularly the archives of the engineers and the associations they created to save the beaches in the 20th century. And in these archives, I realized that Los Angeles had, and the whole Santa Monica Bay really, had been used as a sort of testing ground for a group of engineers, but also urban planners, businessmen, and local elites who, got together really to reinvent the beach experience for the modern age, and who rearranged the coastal landscape according to what they believe was the city's needs, but also their aspirations for the city. And so they enlarged the beaches, moved billions of trucks of sand from one area to the next, built parking lots, built accommodations, and really transforming that coastal landscape. Now, this led to one of the central conclusions to my research, which is that the beaches of LA, just like most shorelines across the world, are hardly natural. They are really neither natural nor artificial. They are something hybrid. That is, that the boundaries between natural and artificial are incredibly blurred. That is not specific, of course, to LA, but I think LA, as well as we'll explain in a second, is a particularly interesting place to look at this. Now, let me take you to the beaches, and that's where, again, you see that hybridity of landscapes I was just talking about. Now, let me take you to the beaches of LA again, but to the Santa Monica Bay. But this time, let's go back in time. So I'm taking you on my time machine, and we're going back to the early 20th century, which is when the book starts, really. The book actually also takes into account what happened before the 20th century, but really gets into the detail, the nitty-gritty details from the early 20th century. So in the early 20th century, the beaches of LA were actually, in the eyes of some people at least, not in the best shape. They were dirty, crowded, and eroded. Pollution from untreated sewage, in particular, was problematic, but also from industrial effluents, from oil extraction, famously in Venice. We have a picture here. All this pollution was a critical issue. But so was the fact that the coastline was largely private, and many parts of it were inaccessible to the public. Erosion was actually so severe that some of the metropolitan region's most famous beaches were on the verge of disappearing altogether. Now, to make matters worse, the famous turn-of-the-century beach amusement parks on Venice Pier, Santa Monica Pier, Ocean Park Pier, those places that at once symbolized modernity, that at once enthralled the public, did not appeal to middle-class tastes anymore. And for this elite, for upper-class people, they were seen as cheap, as vulgar, and artificial. Now, this was not just an LA phenomenon. the same kind of discourses were circulating on the East Coast or about Midwestern lake beaches. That is, that beaches were a place a bit dirty, all these teeming crowds, these, rackety, deteriorating amusements, and these eroded shores. So in the early 20s, in other words, urban beaches across America were experiencing some sort of a crisis. And this is when sand rush starts, beginning in the 1920s and reaching a peak in the post-war years. Reinventing the beach for the metropolitan age, for the modern age, became the obsession of a group of engineers, urban planners, business people, politicians, and city leaders. Now, the search for that ideal beach was a modern trend, and indeed, I followed the archive and the people involved in the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association, which was founded in New Jersey, actually. But what I show in the book is that these efforts were particularly dynamic in LA. That is where the sad state of the beaches unleashed a sand rush of sorts, a sand rush of self-appointed beach experts who saw the city's fate as tied to its coastline and who set on to remake the beaches using modern planning and engineering method. So let's meet those men, mostly men, white men, who were behind those efforts. And I call these men, the LA Beach Lobby. By 1930s, what I call the LA Beach Lobby had coalesced around civic organizations such as the California Beaches Association, but also the Shoreline Planning Association. All these archives are at UC Riverside now. They were at Berkeley when I did my research. And around also important figures such as Berkeley engineer Maura P. O'Brien that you see on the top right, and Los Angeles Superintendent of Recreation, George Sheltie. Now, these LA beach people, they first looked east for inspiration. They looked to Robert Moses in Long Island. They looked to Europe for inspiration, but quite quickly, they started devising their own innovative solutions to coastal problems. In the 30s and 40s, they started, publishing, releasing reports and other printed publications, developing those ideas. And in the years following the Second World War, because California experienced that demographic boom and experienced this enormous economic boom, they were finally in a position to to deploy those reports, those plans they had worked on for so many decades. And LA really established itself at that point as a national leader in beach planning, beach development, and beach preservation, and beach acquisition as well. So those coastal engineers, together with their associate, those business leaders, city leaders, they accomplished a remarkable feat of enlarging the beaches up to 4 times their original size in places by using artificial beach nourishments. They built those parking lots that I was talking about. We see the one in Venice here. They built those modernist buildings and got rid of hot dog stands that they thought were a bit cheap and didn't look very good. And within a span of a few years, really, this new coastal landscape sprang up from the earth. Vast, beautiful sandy beaches, complete with large parking lots for, the middle-class post-war family, sparkling clean toilet facilities, and of course, freeways for easy access. Now, the modernization campaigns I call it also the modernization campaign, and this post-war moment where they accomplish what they've been wanting to do for a while. So this modernization campaign, most cherished and most important in my eyes, most important legacy, is no doubt the fact that it opened up vast public spaces for Angelenos to express themselves and show off their bodies. Thanks to a $100 million state budget surplus, we wish we were in that situation, the list of public beaches grew exponentially in the immediate post-war period. Once widened and cleaned up, the shores became the training ground and exhibition stage for original beach cultures, from the surfing boom to the bodybuilding phenomenon. And here we have a picture, of course, of Muscle Beach in Santa Monica. Now, the modern beach, as it was imagined by the LA beach lobby, was not intended for all public, and it was indeed an ideal of exclusion. Using the models of suburban shopping malls and theme parks, the lobby remade the beaches following the needs and desires of the white middle-class nuclear family. And so by adapting the beaches to the suburban age, the lobby effectively prevented a white flight from the coast. But these transformations had adverse consequences for some beachgoers that just didn't fit what the lobby had in mind for those beaches. And these transformations are particularly apparent in Ocean Park, a section of Santa Monica Beach that you all are may be familiar with, which used to have Muscle Beach, so the original Muscle Beach, not the Venice one that we're familiar with today. So it had the original Muscle Beach. It had the historical Black Beach, also known as Bay Street Beach, or derogatively called the Inkwell. It also had the gay beach, Crystal Beach, where you had gay bathhouses and bars. And again, in very close proximity, you had Ocean Park Piers with its gambling concessions, hot dog stands, and other stands that attracted a working class patrons. So clearly it was a very special place. And it's no coincidence that all these sort of subcultures, working class cultures, were in close proximity together. So there, an alliance of real estate interests and city officials combined planning and policing strategies to basically turn what had been a haven for gay, Black, and working class beachgoers into a modern playground for the white middle class. And within a few years, so between 1955 and 1958, all these beaches I've just talked about kind of like disappeared or had to transform themselves in some way or another. I can talk more about this if you want in the Q&A. The beach modernization campaign eventually came to an end in the late 60s and the early 70s. So these transformations really took place in the 40s, 50s, and I'd say up to the mid 60s. Marina del Rey being really one of the last big transformation or big construction, big construction of that period. Eventually, it came to an end because they were just not, a new generation came and had different ideas for the beach. Throughout the post-war period, there was a huge consensus in the 50s and early 60s on what needed to be done. Beaches needed to be bought for the public, improved for the public, because ultimately this would lead to rising real estate prices and booming businesses. And for those old-style conservationists from the lobby, the beach lobby, they thought that preserving the beaches and developing the beaches at the same time made sense. It came hand in hand, if you want. But for a new generation of environmentalists who were inspired by the counterculture and the new left, this just didn't make sense anymore. For them, beaches had to be left alone. And they certainly did not agree to the kind of crazy plans that some had for the beaches. In particular, I'm thinking here of the Santa Monica Causeway, which was a project that was going to involve artificial islands. You see it on the left, a gigantic freeway. It was really an excessive, probably extremely disruptive and project. It didn't happen, of course, largely because some people resisted those kinds of projects at this point. These new environmentalists championed beach accessibility for all and respect for coastal ecologies. Another aspect of that moment is the controversy over ocean high-rises and what some perceived as the Miamization of Los Angeles. So this also contributed to the dismantlement, if you want, of what I call the LA beach lobby. And finally, by the 60s, you also had the rise of the new right. represented by, the rising power of someone like Ronald Reagan, and a growing distrust of big government, which fueled resistance against more public beach acquisition, especially in Orange County, but to some extent also in LA. So by the late 60s, the beach lobby was no more. Yet its legacies are still very much present in today's coastline. Just think, for instance, of the creation of the Coastal Commission, the California Coastal Commission, which was created in 1972 and which still exists today. It's the state agency in charge of guaranteeing coastal access, but also of regulating coastal development. Now, the Coastal Commission is largely, in a sense, the heir, if you want, of a product of those campaigns led by the beach lobby in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Why? Because these members instilled a sense of entitlement to the beaches among Californians. Beaches are for the people was their slogan. And that slogan really penetrated the soul of Californians. It really spread far and wide. And I think we have to thank that lobby for this important legacy. So the book really recounts the origins, the consequences, and the legacies of this incredible modernization campaign that transformed LA into one of the world's greatest coastal metropolises, at least in my eyes. And it shows how, by rearranging coastal ecologies according to their aspirations, their needs, Angelenos also reshaped their city, their bodies, and ultimately reinvented the beach experience, not just for LA and not just for the US, but really for the world, in the sense that it is an important reference all over the world, the way LA does the beach, whether it is in terms of beach bodies, through Hollywood, obviously this has spread far and wide, or whether it is in terms of design, urban planning, engineering, landscaping, etc., etc. It's an enormously influential model, seaside model, inspired by Hawaii, inspired by Hollywood, inspired by the local body cult, inspired, of course, by that beach lobby I talked about. But all these inspiration kind of like synthesized uniquely in LA and created the LA beach, this really iconic place, but also state of mind and imagination, if you want. Now that I've kind of like told you about the general arc of the book, let me share with you some of my favorite finds when I was researching this book. So that was pretty much throughout the 2010s that I was doing the research for this book. So as a French grad student who spent a lot of time in the libraries and around wherever people let me go, and who talked to some of the people who hung out at the beach. I mean, whoever would let me talk to them. So in no particular order, some of my favorite finds. So as you can imagine, I worked a lot on the history of Muscle Beach, the place in Santa Monica by the beach, just south of the pier, which from the 1930s onwards kind of became this magnet for acrobats, gymnasts, and eventually in the 50s for bodybuilders who exercised, worked out in public, and organized these shows that became famous for the Mr. and Miss Muscle Beach. And here we see two Mr. Muscle Beach. So we have loads of pictures, loads of photographs about Muscle Beach of that era, which was really a national sensation. The thing about Muscle Beach is that eventually, amongst certain city council people in Santa Monica, it became associated with a sort of like problematic, freakish, slightly disturbing and transgressive subculture of maybe, associated with homosexuality, etc. And so they got rid of it in 1958 following an incident involving two underage girls. That happened off the beach, but nonetheless, they used it as a pretext to close the beach. And at the time when I was looking at the archives, it wasn't always clear to me what was so, transgressive or subversive about Muscle Beach. And so I remember going to looking at Don Jim's photograph. So Don Jim was a a photographer who was born in Hawaii in 1922 of Chinese descent, who came in the 50s in LA using the GI Bill to study photography, in LA. And he was really attracted to Muscle Beach because himself, he was a bodybuilder. And he had a beautiful body, actually. So he came to the beach, took loads of photographs. These are some of his photographs that we have today. They're owned by his widow, Margot Jim. And so I went to Margot's house, and I remember going through the pictures with her. And eventually we bumped into that picture. And I said, wait, Margot, let's do a close-up. And boom, was that man, that very muscular man with, clearly cross-dressing, maybe what we could call, quote unquote, a drag show. And that really struck me as something interesting. I'm like, oh, I see. That's what some people found extremely disturbing about Muscle Beach. Interestingly enough, this is something that was never mentioned in the Britain archives. This man wearing these earrings and these fake boobs. I mean, this is obviously a bit like, a sexualized show, especially because he's half naked. People are laughing. They're clearly enjoying the show. But I can see why, people had a problem with Muscle Beach. But what was interesting to me is, I found this in the photographs of this particular photographer who is close to the Muscle Beach scene, but you couldn't see any sign of, drag shows in the written archives and newspapers, etc. So I thought it was an interesting archive story I want to share with you. Here's another one I really like. It's it's a clipping from a scrapbook that I found at the Santa Monica History Museum, where I volunteered one summer. And I just love this picture. It's adorable. This little boy is 1.5, Larry Sims, doing some, lifting a barbell. I thought this picture was so telling of this unique LA beach culture that emerged in the 20s and 30s. And that, unlike on other beaches in Europe or on the East Coast, which were still very focused on hygiene, on health, in LA, the beach was about beauty, the body cult, and showing off. And I thought that this picture was really a great way to capture that unique combination of fun and showmanship and body cult that characterized the LA beach cultures. So I really like this one. Now, this one is a bit more serious. So I was doing research at the History Museum, and I was looking everywhere. And at the time, they had just moved in their new building, and things were a bit chaotic back there in the archival space. Now it's much more ordered. I was actually there on Saturday, and it's much, much, much more organized. But at the time, it was a bit like chaos. And I remember just happening upon that picture and thinking, what is this? Let's take a picture. And then eventually I did some research, and I realized that Ebony Beach Club was a really important part of the story of Ocean Park. So in 1957, a Black entrepreneur called Silas White bought this building, which was the old Elks building in Santa Monica. And it was on Ocean Avenue. It's on Ocean Avenue, just a few yards from the historical Black Beach, and which had always been favored by African Americans since at least the 1920s. So Silas White's idea was to offer a sort of like elevated beach experience for the Black middle class in LA. Just 2 months after he acquired the club, the city of Santa Monica used its power of eminent domain to purchase the building, claiming it needed to provide parking spaces for its new civic center. White protested by erecting a sign on the building, and you can see it here. Santa Monica official used eminent domain condemnation for racial discrimination. So he protested. And what's really interesting is that this is the only picture we have with that sign on it that Silas White had done. There's another picture of the building that exists in the LA Times archive, but this is the only one. And anyway, the city won in court, unfortunately, and they never built the parking spaces. It's actually today, the lot is occupied by the Viceroy Hotel. And there are actually calls now for reparations for the family, the descendants of Silas White. Why? Probably because why did the city council use its power of eminent domain? Probably because it didn't want to have a big black beach club in the middle of the city, right by the beach. Even though this had been something that the Black community had wanted for a very long time and tried to have for many, many years. So what's interesting is then later, Alison Rose Jefferson, who's a historian of the African American experience in California, who looks at leisure in particular, emailed me and said, Elsa, where did you find this picture? We need it for this exhibit about Black Santa Monica. And I was like, oh, I don't know, I found it and it was like completely randomly, it wasn't organized. So I just put it back in one of those drawers and I tried to explain as much as I could. Anyway, they found it. But it's one of those stories where, you found like some random photographs in a completely random place and it ends up having a really important story to it. Okay, final archival find. Well, it's not really an archival find, but these are two fun pictures to compare. The first one on the left is of course, JFK on Santa Monica Beach. This was in August 1962. Kennedy was visiting his sister and his brother-in-law who had a house by the beach in Santa Monica. And it wasn't planned at all. It just, after an afternoon spent there, he decided to take a dip in the ocean. And of course, this took all the Secret Service by surprise. And of course, the passers-by recognized him and started rushing to him. And it was a very lucky day for Bill Beebe, the photographer from the LA Times. He was there standing just in case he could catch a glimpse of the president, and he rushed into the sea and took those fantastic snapshots of the president surrounded by all these people. The picture did very well. That series of photographs did very well. It was printed by Life magazine, by the LA Times, because, JFK just embodied that post-war LA beach culture that was on display everywhere. In music, you had the surfing music that was just about to boom. You also it was just before the beach party movies became like these hits at the box office. He was just, with that tan, that Hollywood smile, he was just perfect, the perfect man for that moment. And then you have Nixon on the other side, who tried maybe to, repeat the same move, but definitely wasn't as successful. So Nixon, of course, was from California himself, had a house in San Clemente, and for his 50th birthday, his team organized this photo op of him walking on the beach, which seemed like a great way to do this. This was in January 1971, so it's the winter. You can tell by what he's wearing. He's a bit, he has a windbreaker, he has those dark pants and, office shoes. And the photograph was not well received by journalists and media because, Nixon looked a bit stiff for this environment of the beach. Kind of emphasized his age and how awkward he was. So the LA Times actually made fun of him a little bit, like, poked fun at him gently. He just was not that, it was not really into the beach culture. Let's just say it. Let's just put it this way. So I find it interesting to compare these two pictures. Anyway, I'm getting to the end of my talk now, and I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at now, the present and the future. So the LA Beach Lobby, as I explained, was able to grow the beaches without much concern really for major weather events or other disruptions. This was a long period of stability really for the beaches, but also for California weather. And this period of stability is coming to an end. In a 2017 article, a group of engineers and marine scientists who modeled shoreline response to climate change concluded that 31% to 67% of Southern California beaches may become completely eroded by 2100 due to sea level rise. So it really kind of like forced me to reconsider when I prepared the book from the PhD to the French book, and then later from the French book to the American book, what's going to happen? Like, what are my children going to be able to enjoy the beaches when they're adults? And what kind of response are we going to give to those challenges? And I mean, to be fair, the local authorities here in LA are taking this very seriously and are, trying to prevent the worst from happening. Now, the places that are most at threat locally are in Malibu, in Venice. Projections in general show in 2022 that sea level will reach at least 8 inches by 2050 on the West Coast. And by 2050, again, all but the largest Malibu beaches are expected to be below annual flood level. So below annual flood level means that at least once a year, there'll be a flooding event where those beaches are underneath water, basically. And those same projections show, for instance, so these are from Climate Central, that the Santa Monica Pier, I think that's actually not by 2050, this is 2100, show that the Santa Monica Pier will be partially underneath water as well, at least once a year. Now, in places like Malibu, coastal erosion and sea level rise are compounding an already tense situation where private beach homeowners have fought against public access to the coast for decades. This is most spectacularly in Broad Beach, where people have built a seawall and built fake dunes, etc. And in doing this, we need to be careful. We need to be vigilant, because those attempts at preserving those private beaches may end up costing us nearby public beaches, or may end up, threatening those public beaches nearby. So it's important that we keep this vigilance in California. And when I say we, I say mostly you guys, because I don't live here, can't be really as much involved, because, beaches have a really important role to play in an era of climate chaos, and in an era where we're going to have more frequent heat waves and more intense heat waves. Public beaches have a really important role to play for social justice and for climate justice, as places where you can get a bit of cool air and get in the sea and refresh yourself. Now, in some places along the California coast, bringing about justice actually means reprivatizing the beach. And I'm thinking here of Bruce's Beach, which you may be familiar with. Bruce's Beach was, or at least the building by the beach used to be owned by a couple of African Americans who had turned it into a business for Black beachgoers, and it was seized again by the Manhattan Beach City Council, in the 20s, using again the power of eminent domain. And in the 50s, eventually was turned into a public park. But eventually in the early 2000s, the history of racism in Manhattan Beach, and in particular the story with Bruce's Beach, came back to light. And again, eventually with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter demonstration, there were calls for racial justice and for reparation. And in an unprecedented move, the county officials have transferred the property in 2022 to the descendants of that Black couple, Charles and Willa Bruce. Now, with that transfer, the California dream has regained some of its luster, yet the transfer ironically arrives at a time when, there's no guarantee that this beach will continue to exist by the end of the century. So this is not enough. In other words, if we want to guarantee the preservation of beaches for the future, if we want to guarantee climate justice, we need to end our mooring the coast. We need to let beaches wax and wane, which is what they used to do before coastal engineering became ubiquitous. We need to maybe plan for selective retreat in certain areas, for managed retreat. And we need to continue fighting for public shores. And finally, and that's a tough ask, but we need to end our dependence on fossil fuels. These are no small tasks, but continuing business as usual will only deliver a future with narrower and less accessible beaches. And I hope I've showed you here today how important, how precious California beaches are. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'm back. That
All right.
was that was great. Oh, you have an
And
end slide. The end. We'll leave that up for a second, and then we'll stop the share so people can see your face a little closer up for this Q&A. But I will say that this was great. I think this is such an important piece of California history that we don't really hear about a lot. Both the social justice side of it, the environmental justice side of it, all the conservation issues. So this was really, really interesting. I have tons of thoughts and questions for you that I haven't shared, but we'll get to the Q&A. We'll give folks a chance to put their questions and comments in the chat or the Q&A now.
that's
And
the
I put that's the book. I put it in the chat for people who are interested in buying the book. We have a discount code that Elsa has shared with us. You can buy it from the publisher. And someone just put in the chat that they grew up on these beaches. I will say I'm particularly interested in this topic and the beach because I grew up on Jones Beach, Robert Moses State Park in Long Island in New York. So I've had Atlantic Coast beaches. Now I'm here in California, Pacific Coast beaches. My family lives in Florida, so more Atlantic Coast Florida beaches. So it's super interesting to me about the beach life and growing up, and the people who grew up on the beaches.
This is Jones Beach. Just for
Yay!
it's
Jones
a
Beach.
huge model for the California LA people. Huge, very important model of
Yeah.
what a modern beach should look like.
Yes, it's amazing. If you've never been to Jones Beach, you should go. I'll take you. Someone I went to high
I've been
school.
there.
You've been there. Someone I went to high school with is still a lifeguard on Jones Beach.
Cool.
Crazy. Really cool though. So that was really, really fun for me personally. I think we're going to look at some of the chat and the Q&A. You might have it up as well. And if you want to kind of look
Yeah.
at what's in there, that's great. Some of it's just
Yeah.
commentary, super interesting research. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm seeing Janice's question about Salton Sea in Southern California, which was an area whereby I'm reading, middle-class African Americans vacationed, as well as myself in the 70s. What is the history there, especially environmentally wise? If I'm not mistaken, it was man-made. Yeah, you're not mistaken. And actually, I mean, in this case, I really have to hand it over to this other historian whose book is gonna come back to me on the Salton Sea. Wait. I'm typing it real quick. Yeah, it's called The Settler Sea, California's Salton Sea and the Consequences of Colonialism by Tracy Bryn Voiles. She is if you have an interest in Salton Sea, you'll be probably very interested in that book. I didn't look at Salton Sea because I really concentrated myself on the Santa Monica Bay, so really from Malibu to Palos Verdes. With obviously, sometimes I looked at Orange County. For instance, I did some work on the spring break in Balboa and Newport Beach down there. But, I mostly concentrated myself on there. If you're interested in African-American beaches, there's, of course, Allison Rose Jefferson's book on living the California dream. You probably already know about it. But in case some people don't hear, that's really the reference for African-American leisure in California, in particular beach leisure, but not just beach leisure.
Yeah, I was going to say Allison Rose Jefferson talked to the book club when her book came out, probably like right before the pandemic. I was going to guess like 2020-ish maybe.
Yeah.
It was great. So if anybody there didn't write that down and wants to follow up, you can email me and I'll get you the information about
If you're interested in Bruce's Beach and the Bay Street Beach that I mentioned, which was in Santa Monica, that's really the book. I mean, I talk about these beaches, of course, they're really important, but I draw a lot from Allison's work. She interviewed a lot of Black Santa Monicans who have lived there for generations. This really goes back to like the late 19th century with the establishment of that area in Santa Monica where African-American families congregated and lived. Should I go down with
Yeah,
Michael?
sure. You're great at curating your own questions. I love it.
Well, thank you for joining. Michael is someone we've been in touch with, so it's wonderful that he's at the talk. Sewage remains a big problem, Michael says. To what extent did beach lobbyists work with LA Public Works on addressing the problem, especially with the Hyperion plant that was polluting Venice and adjacent beaches before 1950? So yeah, they worked very much with the Public Works people. The problem was not so much the Public Works people who were very aware of how Hyperion as a sewage treatment plant, so which is right on the bay, by the way, for those people who don't know it, they were very aware of the fact that the sewage treatment plant was completely overwhelmed, basically, by the demographic growth of LA, and all that sewage needed to go somewhere, and the pipeline that was, I mean, that's not the right word, but like the big tube that was dumping off all that sewage was full of cracks, and it was just a really, really polluted area, especially immediately south of the Hyperion area. So Venice in particular, but also Playa del Rey, etc., were particularly polluted. The problem was that it cost a lot of money to upgrade a sewage treatment plant, and nobody cares. Nobody wants to spend a lot of money on sewage treatment plants because apart from the few people who live right by the beach, nobody really, experiences the problems associated with a defective sewage treatment plant. So in the archives, I found a lot of letters from people living in Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, Venice, saying it's disgusting, it smells. There's a famous story about, I think it's Ray Bradbury walking on the beach and seeing all these little things on the beach, and he's like wondering what it is, and then when he looks close, it's in 1950, it's like condoms. So anyway, it was really, really bad, but nobody in LA wanted to pay for that. So the LA taxpayers would again and again vote against upgrading. Eventually, it got so bad that the California Public Health Committee basically sued the city, and that's where and forced the city to put a quarantine. So this is throughout the war, and up until 1950, you have a quarantine that includes, for instance, Venice, but it never included the nicer part of Santa Monica. So I think because it wasn't nicer beaches, they allowed this situation to, last for a bit longer than it probably should have, because it was more working class beaches than nicer beaches. But eventually, in 1950, they upgrade Hyperion, and they actually remove all the dunes that were on Hyperion, using that dunes to build up the beaches that were eroded, and by removing the beaches, they can expand Hyperion. So it's like a very good move for them. They're like, perfect, we're killing two birds with one stone. Except, of course, it means that today we have an enormous sewage treatment plant just by the beach, which again doesn't seem like the best use of precious sandy areas. So in the book, you see, for instance, this is like the area, like I think it was, this area over there that was from Station 5 in Hermosa to Station 14 in Venice. So this whole area that was quarantined. So yeah, and then within like 5 years, again, the sewage treatment plant was not up to par. So, And again, in the 80s, I get into it in the epilogue, but there was loads of sewage problem in LA. And then Heal the Bay was founded then, so that, to fix the problem.
There's a great question about, because you focus a lot on Los Angeles beaches, but what other California beaches did you kind of poke your research into? Clearly you went to Long Island and looked at that beach, but yes, someone mentions Long Beach, any Northern California beaches, other.
Not so much, Connie Chang. I don't know if she came to your book club, but she wrote a great book on Monterey Beach. So there was already some work done on Northern California. And then Sarah Fingal, you might want to have her in a couple of years when she finished with her book, but she worked a lot more in San Francisco. So interestingly enough, it's maybe because I'm French, and so I was seeing things from a bit of a distance. I mean, obviously I refer to San Diego and other, important beaches, but actually, I used more like international examples as places of comparison, but also because the LA people, they use the Riviera as a reference. They used Coney Island as a reference, Atlantic City, et cetera, et cetera. And even, Brighton, Blackpool in the UK. So it's a very wide and international really set of references that
Interesting. Yeah, and you talk about those in the book, right?
Yes, I do.
So that's an important selling point. We want people to know that that's in the book. Great. Well, we have a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you might have seen in the chat or the Q&A that you want to talk about?
I do cover a little bit the beach culture of the 80s and 90s, a little bit, but to be honest, it's not the main bit of the book. Victoria, a little bit of Long Beach, a little bit, but again, I kind of really stayed on the recreational beach of the Santa Monica Bay. But of course, the Pike, Long Beach does make an appearance as well. You might be interested in Christine Dunbar Hester books that came out recently on the ports of LA, Maureen.
Oh, yeah.
Northern California, yeah, not so much.
There's the last question in the Q&A. I have a question too, but I think the last question in the Q&A is an interesting one. It talks about the indigenous groups that were once on the beaches. Is there any movement going on that you know of, or what's happening with getting their coastal lands back and that whole process?
So I know the Tonga really recently recovered a bit of land back. I do mention the uses that indigenous people in LA, the Tongva Gabrielino, did of the beaches. So that's actually something I added between the French and the English version that I'm really happy that I did, because it was a big I should have had this really in the French version. So I'm glad I had the redo to include that as well. I think it's very much something that is happening at the moment, and I need to look into it. But I think it's still in development. I can't say so much about it.
Phyllis, I'll contact you about Allison Rose Jefferson and her book. I see you posted something in the chat in the Q&A, and I'll get that information to you so you can.
And if you want me to sign the book, I see Mariana is asking. Well, I'm in LA until Sunday, and I'm gonna be at the University of Redlands on Wednesday, which is a bit far. But I'm at USC on Thursday and Friday for a conference. So I'm easy. You can reach out and we can try to make it work.
Mariana, I can also see if I can work something out for you. So let me connect with Elsa about that and see if we can get that taken care of for you.
I see. Yeah. Oh, I love all the comments. Oh, Lawrence is here. Fantastic. Oh,
yeah.
It's cool to see all the messages and the comments. Oh, thank you.
So one last thing that you mentioned about the transformation of those the three specific areas, like the Muscle Beach, the Gay Beach, and the Black Beach, and you said, I can talk more about that in the chat or the Q&A. But I was just wondering, like, what happened? Were they just completely displaced? Did they move somewhere else? A combination of both of those things? Like, where did they end up?
So Muscle Beach, there was already a plan to move it. It was already in the plan. They didn't know how it was going to happen, but the city council were already planning for something that would be a bit less chaotic, a bit less messy, because Muscle Beach was all very informal. I mean, it was like a Santa Monica city recreation site, but it was a bit messy. It was a bit informal. It was multi-generational, multi-gender, multiracial, and again, like those people in semi-naked, etc. So anyway, in 1958, those 5 bodybuilders are found off the beach in a cheap apartments, not far from the beach, with 2 underage African-American girls. And the people in the city council who were really anti-Muscle Beach seized on this to say, this is a scandal. These are freaks. These are perverts. We need to close Muscle Beach. This is like a safety issue for our children. And they dump a lot of sand on the area where the Muscle Beach shows were happening. And basically the athletes cannot come back. And there are loads of talks at the time. So what to do, where to move Muscle Beach. But eventually, a lot of the bodybuilders end up going to Venice because Venice already had at that point an area, and there's some play area that's introduced in Santa Monica, but nothing like what they had before. And then later in the 1990s, they reintroduced the rings. So yeah, Muscle Beach basically disappears from Santa Monica. Santa Monica doesn't want to have anything to do with those, perverts, quote unquote. The African-American beach is complicated. It's hard to know also, but based on the research that Alison Jefferson did, and based on my research, my sense is that slowly but surely, both because African Americans had more opportunities to go elsewhere because of the advances of the civil rights movement, but also because the city, for instance, by taking over Silas White's building, basically made it clear that that didn't want a Black beach, that it was a reminder of the past of the racial segregation, and they were extremely uncomfortable with this idea of having a Black beach. And so the beach kind of like dissolved, like the history of the beach was lost slowly but surely. Combination of things. The gay beach, police raids after police raids, destruction of bathhouses because they're seen as, they don't say that it's because of gay people. They say because it's not safe. It's an old decrepit building. We need to get rid of it. We need more modern beach buildings. So it's a combination of planning and policing that gets rid of Crystal Beach. Crystal Beach, the thing is that there are plenty areas of gay beaches, and there's some near Will Rogers State Beach. So it just is not gonna, Crystal Beach as it was disappears, but there are other areas for gay
people.
Yeah. And then finally, Ocean Park Pier becomes Pacific Ocean Park, POP, a new park, marine themed, that is inspired by Disneyland. But actually, it's going to also go bankrupt in the 60s. And so eventually, POP also is going to be closed off. And then eventually, the pier is going to go up in flame, and then it's going to be destroyed. And so we don't have Ocean Park Pier anymore.
Well, thanks for that downer of an ending about what happened to Ocean Pier. Well, this is great. We're past 6 o'clock now, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up by, Elsa, I guess, thanking you for this terrific presentation. This was just wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. It was just great to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the comments. I'll take a moment to read them later, and I'm sorry if I couldn't respond to all your questions, but thank you so much for attending the talk.
Yeah, and I'll send you all the questions from the chat and the Q&A after this, Elsa, so you can look at them, and if there's anyone you want to get back to or get back to me so I can get back to them, we can work that out. So I will send you this afterwards. And I just want to thank everyone for attending this Book Club of California event tonight. It's great to have you here online at another webinar from the Book Club. I hope that you'll join us for our next program. It's in a few weeks from now. It's in June, Monday, June 10th at 5 o'clock. It's another virtual program, and it's titled Ellen Browning Scripts, New Money and American Philanthropy, 1836 to 1932. And our speaker will be author and the professor of history at the University of San Diego, Molly McLean. So Ellen Browning Scripts, Monday, June 10th, will be the next virtual program here at the Book Club. You can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs, or using any of the links that you might be getting in emails from the Book Club about our upcoming programs. So thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you will come back to another Book Club webinar or in-person event when we begin those again in the fall. Have a wonderful evening, be well, and take care of yourself. Thanks, everyone.